inventor really is an entrepreneur. Yes, an inventor can just invent stuff, but the entrepreneur is where you're coming back to that vision and that reality. Having raised over $40 million in grants for the work that you do, what is the one thing that you think has sort of got you over the line to get to that point where you could turn around and actually state a fact like that?
Once you get past that initial sort of hard part of the conversation, then you've got to very quickly do a deep dive into someone's head.
What is your mission and why are you on that mission?
As human beings, as people, we have to care. That care and empathy is so important.
Today on the podcast, I welcome Veena Sahajwalla, an internationally renowned inventor, engineer, and scientist. She's currently the Director of Sustainable Materials and Research Technology Centre at the Uni of New South Wales. She's a pioneer in the sustainable innovation known for eco-friendly processes and recycling plastics and rubber tyres. Hello, Veena, how are you?
Good. Tell me a little bit about you're an engineer. How did you come up with this great idea, entrepreneurial engineer?
Oh, thanks.
Totally.
Appreciate that. Oh, look, I started my career as a civil engineer, working predominantly on pipes, pumps, concrete, big infrastructure projects,
Yeah.
Sydney Water, and then went to Vietnam with an Australian aid project, which was amazing. It just changed my life, to be honest. I sort of came back to Sydney a bit revitalized and refreshed, thinking about new ways of doing things. Did a lot of work with developers. I do a lot of work with developers, and I think probably if I could tie it down to one thing, when I was working at Sydney Water, I was always trying to think of ways to save money for the client and time. And then when I worked with developers, they really embraced that, the client, not just innovation, but sustainability, how to do things faster, quicker, more efficiently. And I think from that, it really changed my mindset to become an entrepreneurial engineer. And the idea originally was to frame up all of my learnings over my career and try and mentor and coach young engineers, particularly on soft skills and storytelling, and just trying to reframe the whole thing around that engineers are boring or they're nerds, which I talked about a little bit. And then, I've been working with someone and they said, oh, you should do a podcast. And I thought, how good would it be? I've already recorded 7 episodes.
Yeah.
Just to create a little bank.
Yeah.
Some of the conversations that I've been having with young engineers and old engineers and different engineers across different walks of life is really, it's really inspiring. And that's what I'm sort of hoping this podcast can do, can inspire young engineers to think differently and learn from some of the conversations. And yeah, that's sort of how it came about. And yeah, to be honest, it's a passion project. One of the first things someone said is, "Oh, when are you going to monetize?" And I'm like, I'm not here to monetize. It's a passion project for me at the moment, and so grateful to have you on. I'll be honest, because I've been watching you on TV and the like, and very inspired by your journey, and hopefully can hear more about it.
Yeah, thanks, Darren. No, thank you. Certainly, it's very inspiring to hear what you've been up to. So really very, very good to hear people like yourselves, engineers, who take your own kind of passion to be able to help other people. And especially, as you say, it'll kind of lift a little bit of that kind of image of engineers that, as you say, oh, they're just, boring engineering kind of people. And I guess how many kind of normal citizens have had engineering discussions with engineers, right? And you don't have to be an engineer to have an engineering discussion, is the way I see it.
Yeah. I posted about it today on LinkedIn, funnily enough.
Okay.
Because I think, the engineers lack that level of storytelling where their eyes don't just glaze over as they start getting technical. And I think it's our role as engineers to try and, use the Feynman technique or try and break things down like you're explaining to a 5-year-old. Otherwise, people will just glaze over and they won't engage. So I think it's a really powerful skill that, engineers need to have. And it's not my first question, but I'm going to ask it anyway. And usually I just do these things
Yeah.
ad hoc. Like I've already introduced you separately. I don't need to go through that. But as an inventor, an engineer, and a scientist, how do you break down some of those real complex ideas to people who might want to invest or maybe
Mm.
your clients? How do you navigate something like that?
Yeah, look, I mean, I think you've got to understand first and foremost, whether it's an investor or an industry partner or whoever you're trying to work with, what is it that motivates them? I mean, at the end of the day, we're all human beings, and I think there's got to be something in all of our hearts that kind of drives us and gets us to go to work. And I think to me, if you can really understand, whether it is in the business of what I do around waste and waste management, recycling, manufacturing, I mean, I think people in my world who are doing different aspects of their job are very passionate about understanding how we can deliver better outcomes for the planet. You don't have to be a scientist to be able to kind of at least conceptualize the fact that if we were to put materials back into the supply chain and remanufacture them into new products and save on resources, that would be a much better outcome for the planet. So I think most people will, kind of find a way to connect with that. And I think usually it's about connecting with your heart, with your head, obviously, and then comes the hands, right? So, but, regardless of our profession and what we do in our jobs, if the hearts connect and the values align, then I think you can actually inspire people, because you don't also want to just talk about it from the point of view of, oh my gosh, it's a problem. But what if you talked about it from the context of, yes, it's a challenge, but it also presents an opportunity.
Yeah.
And I think in that regard, to me, I always find that once you've had that, engagement with people, people want to hear more about the story of what it is that, you think we could do. But it's not about what could you do, what could I do? It's about how can we collaborate and do things together. So you've got to find that common platform,
Yeah.
and that's the common platform. If you don't have that, then nothing kind of moves beyond that. It's not about me coming to somebody else and going, yeah, I've got a great solution. Uh, I bet you like it. Well, no, I mean, that's not the way to go about doing it. You've got to be able to connect as to what are the things that inspire all of us. And if somebody's in the business who wants to find a way to keep waste out of landfill because they feel that that's something that they can contribute to our planet, then you connect with them on that level. But you've also got to then be ready for some of the more complex solutions. Because I guess if it was easy, then we'd all be doing it, right? So we also recognize that it's not easy. So I guess that's kind of how in my world it's about bringing the science. You talked about science and engineering and inventorship. I think you could be working in your labs and inventing things and doing all of that, and you're really passionate about the science. You get all excited, as I'm sure we all do, as whether you're in science or in engineering, and that's a good thing. But how do you then make sure that the others can literally get inside your head? Because you've been thinking about this for probably years and years.
Yeah.
How do others get into your head and don't just fast forward, your 10 years worth of work into something that you just expect people to sort of just get it in an instant? No,
Yeah.
of course. I mean, there's been a lot of pain in doing the science and designing the experiments. And I like to talk about how the experiments, were happening in the lab in the early days. And, again, if you're not a scientist, it still is fascinating to hear about, like when we're talking about, the making of steel and all the complex, intricate, reactions that occur. People kind of get fascinated. It's like, oh my gosh, you're studying these reactions at
Yeah.
1550 degrees Celsius. And what is that reaction? And, I mean, I've often used, the foam that sits on the cappuccino, coffee
Oh,
as,
yeah.
as an example of when I talk about slag foaming,
Yeah.
and, the analogy between the two. And of course, from my point of view, it literally is. I love my coffee. So, here it is all day long.
Love it.
And so, but, I mean, what people have to find it fascinating is that not just connectivity at the scientific level as to what does that do, but also then it's quite fun for people to go back and remember, interesting. You're comparing, metallurgical reaction in a steel making furnace with your, cappuccino
Yeah.
broth,
Right.
and lots of things like, I talk about how, when we showed that we could dissolve carbon in the making of steel, but even to be able to talk about the concept that steel is an alloy of in carbon and many other elements. But, people may not realize, carbon. So there's a lot of carbon in, for instance, one of the latest bits of work we're doing on waste coffee. And, I'll often talk about, how much carbon is there in coffee and how do you actually make an alloy of iron and carbon where coffee has played a part. And I think people find that usually
Wow. So
pretty
coffee
fascinating.
is at the root of all your analogies to sell to people the complex engineering nature of the work that you're doing. I mean,
Totally.
yeah,
A
wow.
lot of us coffee drinkers have that in common. We're
Yeah.
passionate about your coffee. So you can always find a way to, in a way, connect. I mean, how many people kind of go, whoa, there's carbon and there's hydrogen molecules hidden inside, all these complex things. So when I talk about, even today, I was talking about waste tires with some people in really just to be able to understand that tire has got a complex structure.
Yeah.
And how do you then, in a way, bring about, not, I wouldn't say it's destruction, like you don't want to talk about tire disposal, and it's not about destroying it. It's really about, at the fundamental level, causing enough disruption in its structure without completely destroying it and burning it. You don't do that. What you do is you disrupt its structure. So now it wants to liberate hydrogen molecules. But how do you do that? So again, fascinating to think that, first of all, a tire is not necessarily always a tire, which means at the end of its life, when it's not roadworthy, you're looking at the elemental level that you've got hydrogen and you've got some amount of carbon in it. So that you can, in the quest to achieve decarbonization and lowering our carbon footprint, you can start to think about that, but then also think about the fact that carbon is not just what we emit in the gas phase.
Yeah.
If it's an atom of carbon, well, I mean, that's effectively still a solid carbon atom that is there in our carbs, right? We're used to talking about carbs from a food perspective. So why can't we have a conversation that says, therefore, we don't have to rely on coal if we want that carbon, solid carbon, it can come from other sources. So in a way, I love to have, I know it's a long-winded answer to the question. I love to have conversations that can relate things where it is relatable.
Yes, it is relatable.
Yeah.
And you said it perfectly about, an engineer that has a heart or a client that has a heart, and then using empathy and storytelling to drive a narrative to explain complex ideas through to, someone who's just saying, oh, I want to invest in this idea, or I can understand what you're doing, and talking about the failures as well. I mean, that comes across as so important to me, because it's not just here it is. It's like you realize there's been years of work behind this, and all the things we've done and tried, and the fails and tribulations and successes to get to this point. I mean, that can only really build up the anticipation. I mean, having raised, and I was really fascinated by this, having raised over $40 million in grants for the work that you do, like storytelling we talked about, but what is the one thing that you think has sort of got you over the line with the majority of those applications, or to get to that point where you could turn around and actually state a fact like that?
Yeah, look, I mean, once you get past that initial sort of the hard part of the conversation that we just said, then you've got to very quickly do a deep dive into someone's head. Okay, what is it that's going to motivate a person to be involved in that? And if somebody can get that sense of, hey, you know what, here's a solution. I can be the world's first. I can work on the latest and the best science, but I can actually solve a major global challenge. So the fact that we might have our recent announcement of our microfactory, that we set up in Sydney around plastic filaments, is with an IT partner who has been in the IT waste recycling business for years, right? But for him and us to collaborate, he's got to be able to see how this has got an economic potential. And so the fact that you might go, well, actually, if we're making these plastic filaments for 3D printing, the market opportunity is massive, because all those difficult plastics that people would have ordinarily assumed, oh, well, but this is too hard. All this computer hardware, the printers and everything else. No, that's too difficult to recycle. And that's what his business is about. Well, if he suddenly hears, but wait a minute, so if I've got all of this, and if you're saying that I can use that to make plastic filaments, which then can go into 3D printing, how cool is that?
Yeah.
And it's even more cool when, the person you're talking to is so excited about the idea that he's imagining this microfactory in his factory floor, which is in Sydney. And I remember the first time visiting the factory floor, and he was like, okay, so we're going to have this bit there. That's where the microfactory is going to be. And we're going to add, and true to his word, when we launched the microfactory in July a few months ago, that's it. You've got a microfactory there that's working. And then I guess to me, that's the point, right? It's got to connect to, yes, the heart bit of it.
Yeah.
The bit of it shows the reality. The market opportunities there, 3D printing. You can have customers at both ends of the circularity. There can be people giving you waste. You can use that. You can remanufacture. You can then put that back into production and remanufacturing. So how cool is that? That, really the opportunities are endless in terms of what you could manufacture for different businesses, So I think, to me, that next chapter is going to have to be, you're going to have to be ready for it.
Yeah.
And then just go, oh, well, I've given you my grand vision. Let me come back to you with the other stuff. Once you get people hooked, they're going to go, when can we do it? When?
Yeah. So you're gonna bridge that gap between vision and reality
very quickly.
So back it up with some, obviously, your science and your feasibility, and
yeah, exactly. And to do that, that's why I make the point that, to be able to have the runs on the board in terms of the science and the work that, you might then say, look, I've published it, this is why it is really impactful. So when we talk about impact, societal impact, industrial impact, and then the bigger kind of vision in all of that is that if we are trying to also show to Australians, and then eventually rest of the world that, there are, pioneering concepts that we're developing, that we can take it to fruition and not just kind of go, oh, we're really good at doing the science, but, oh gosh, but sorry, we're not so good at the translation. Well, we shouldn't have to kind of hold ourselves back. If you collaborate, you should be able to walk the talk. And that, to me, is not just a passion for people like myself. I think a lot of people in the world of business and challenging complex scenarios are keen to find solutions. So the fact that you might have all the runs on the board and the lab works there, I think there is appetite in Australia, and the businesses I talk about, the plastic filaments business, which is basically looking at how we might be able to create, innovation and bring innovation to life. I think it is really something that's so important that, we don't just sit back and go, well, but now it's all too hard, so we're just going to give up. It's not going to be easy. But that's why it's an ongoing opportunity, the ongoing partnership of what you develop in terms of the implementation has to be about a continuous journey through collaboration, and I think to me, that's when, everybody has to get excited.
Yeah.
And yeah, absolutely. But you've got to start somewhere.
Yeah. So, I mean, so many questions, but I mean, collaboration with industry, and you use the word perfectly. How important has that been for the success of what you want to do in your
Mm.
career?
Mm. I think collaboration's got to be absolutely top of the list, because you can do things in the labs and in your university environment and research environment, or wherever you might be working, or some development or something you might even be building in your garage, right? It doesn't matter. It's more about how your passion is something that others come on that journey with you. So I think, to me, collaboration has to be about listening to the needs across all participants. So yes, if you've got government funding your program and you look at government's guidelines of what they want to see for the country, but you've got the private sector going, but here's what we want, and then the researchers. I mean, it's always easy to go, well, these are all three different things, and it's going to be too hard, right? But the common thing we have is we're all people living in Australia.
Yeah.
So we've got to look at it from the context of what we can achieve for the country, and then, of course, what we can achieve for the planet as a whole. Then suddenly these barriers disappear. So having transparency and having porosity in how we work together, the language of collaboration, has to be there.
Yeah.
And you've got to listen to each other's requirements. So I think that's what matters across everyone. And I find, local governments also, with whom we've collaborated, councils, incredible people who, again, like we were talking, they're in the business of managing waste, or they're the waste officers, or whatever their job is called. But if they're really passionate, I mean, we've got incredible people who we partner up in Shoalhaven City Council, and again, the same sort of thing. The guy who's in charge of waste there is, always so enthusiastic around what we could collaborate with. And I think once you find local champions, whether they are in industry or local governments, once you find local champions, you often find that it just becomes so normal to collaborate.
Local champions. I think you bang on. Local champions, really, in any setting, whether it's an authority or on a project or a client or even in a consultancy, someone who is invested in the thing, and you can find them. You know that you can rely on them, or they're going to come in with their 2 cents. Champions, it's a really great thing, because I don't think a lot of people focus on that enough. So, Veena, I know that you're on a mission, and I can see that by what you're doing, and I love that. Can you just sum up for the listeners, what is your mission, and why are you on that mission?
Yeah, look, I mean, to me, one of the things that I really feel very strongly about is the fact that, first and foremost, as human beings, as people, we have to care for each other, and whether that happens to be your immediate sort of network of family, your friends, your ecosystem where you work. I think, to me, that care and empathy is so important. And when you actually see some of the kind of practical challenges, even if it's not directly in your own backyard, but somewhere else on the planet, and you see images of, waste being burnt and pollution as a result of that, and how that then impacts on, the health of the planet as well as people. I mean, you can't help but feel that, as a scientist, as an engineer, as an inventor, you have to think that there are things that we can do, and and again, you don't have to be a scientist to think that there are things that, we can do as human beings. And I think to me, that's, first and foremost, the most important aspect that we need to recognize, that as human beings, we can make such a big difference. The way we kind of energize, innovate the ecosystem in which we live. And I think to me, the next kind of chapter, once you do that, once you bring together people, and they could be, in your local community, I think to me, that chapter of how do you then take it forward, because a lot of people do want to know, what can I do? And I think to me, if I apply that to myself and go, what can I do? I can certainly use my science, engineering, and technological skills to create, and to be creative, but also to be able to inspire, people who might want to just have a conversation, somebody who might have listened to what I might have said. And it is absolutely lovely to hear when people, will come up and have a chat about the work. I remember speaking at the National Library in Canberra in August, and it was really lovely, that people in the room, and there were people listening in remotely, but it's just so nice that you can literally have a conversation with people of all ages and people getting excited. And I thought, well, just imagine if the little bit of contribution that you make is about getting everybody around you to be positive and to be uplifted. I think what a difference we can make in showing empathy, but also showing excitement. And I guess the important thing for us has been, collaboration with our partners, and equally importantly for us at the university and other researchers across the country and across the world, that there is so much we can do if we work together. So I think to me, the power of collaboration to have impact on our planet and our people is something that I get excited about every day. So I'm really, really grateful for the opportunity to be here and share some of that journey with you, Darren.
Yeah, it's amazing. And, I know that feeling, that shared excitement. People, can come up to you and talk about whatever it is, your passion that you're working on. And you're right, the people and uplifting people and that positive framework, that had to be the future. Because it gets people invested in an idea or a theme or paradigm, and that's what I think engineers are here for. Not just, like you mentioned before, just coming up with the idea or the solution, but you've got to take people on that journey with you. More people on the journey, then that's where change happens. So, yeah. So tell me, you're a migrant to Australia, and, you obviously have, set your path here. I work with a lot of migrant engineers and international engineers. I'd be interested to know a little bit more about that journey for you. A little bit of detail, when, what happened, maybe how you got into engineering, and some of your reflections on that time for you, and how that might have shaped how you've worked your way into the industry.
Look, I always kind of reflect on, I did my PhD in the States, and reflect on now, the time I've spent in Australia. And I think I would say that time and time again, that one of the nice things about being in Australia is that it's the people, and it's Australians that are so, passionate. They care for, Aussies. And I think to me, I just sort of feel that, my time here, I could not have asked for anything better in terms of, I ended up here because I got a job, and the plan always was to, kind of go elsewhere after a few years of that job. And And of course, all these years later, still here, never left. um, but I think to me, this is the point, right? That, as they say, home is where your heart is. And I think to me that just felt so perfect. And Australia is the best country in the world. I keep saying to people that, in so many different ways, as as an engineer, as someone who's been pursuing science and technology, I think to me it's the best place in the world to live and to be an engineer, to be an entrepreneur. Yes, I think we can all sort of say, oh well, but things could be better. But all in all, we have to look at all the pieces of the puzzle that make Australia so special. And I think to me, the care and compassion that we all have in how we look after people is going to be important, because ultimately engineers, address complex, challenges and find solutions in working with communities, working with people, but do that first and foremost because that's what's in their heart. And I think you can always, talk about the fact that we are a country that, has always had, in my world, resources, and how we take those resources and make that into positive for people and for planet is going to continue to be important. So waste resources in my world of remanufacturing that is going to be something that I'm going to be passionate about, because I know that there is a great opportunity here for us to take the pioneering science that we're doing and build that further and develop engineering and technological advances on that foundational, science. So I think to me, that's really what I get excited about, and certainly the journey in Australia over all of these years has been extremely rewarding. I mean, whether it's the steel industry or now in terms of, the IT world, whether it is indeed, manufacturing waste products and converting those into our green ceramics, and looking at how we can actually create, that value from waste.
Yeah.
As I, like I find that's such an Australian conversation, and that narrative, like, the DIY element of it is fun, and then kind of, feeling like, hey, this is a pretty good deal if I can make this work. So I think in many, many ways, it's that really beautiful narrative of what I think when we hear terms like circular economy in my world, what it actually means to put it into practice is ultimately around, taking that into an actual sense of the making, and that remanufacturing and bringing that to life is really exciting. So I do feel that this is the place to do it. Australia is the place to make it happen.
36% of listeners won't subscribe to this podcast, and that's a real shame. If you want to help me share the stories and help others learn and grow, then please like and subscribe. Yeah, I love that. I mean, I think we coined your mission is that you are attempting to create value from all waste.
Yes.
It's a nice little three-liner that works, I think. I mean, on that, right? So, I look at it and I go, the podcast is called Entrepreneurial Engineer. I mean, let's be honest. And you look at scientist, engineer, inventor. Now, the inventor part for me is the bit that, you're really going, okay, I've got all this technical part, but then I'm going inventor, and I'm really taking on entrepreneur. I mean, let's be honest. And the inventor really is the entrepreneur, because yes, an inventor can just invent stuff, but the entrepreneur is where you're coming back to that vision and that reality. How did you make the transition? And is there anything that you did in that point in time? Did it just happen, or was it just you had the planning behind it? Like, talk me through that. I'm very interested in that part.
I mean, being an entrepreneur is something that, you don't just kind of, wake up one day and you tell yourself, oh gosh, I'm going to be an entrepreneur. Of course not. I think to me, when all of these beautiful parts of your headspace kind of throw you into different pathways, there comes a time when you sort of feel, you know what, like I'm ready to tell the world. And I remember in the early days of green steel as well, wanting to, you're literally wanting to, you're exploring because you want to tell the story of how you've done these experiments and how you've, the experiments are working in the lab and how exciting it is. And you want to sort of go off. And I ended up sort of doing all of that. You go to Pittsburgh and wherever, and to present your work and everything else. And it was quite interesting. So on one hand, one side of your head's going, oh my gosh, how cool are these experiments? I want to be able to tell the world how we've actually achieved that. And then I guess the other part of kind of the invention, innovation, and all of that part of the university that looks after, the ability to make sure that you've kind of protected the IP, and how you do that. For all of us, there is always a first time when you're sort of not quite sure how all of this actually happens. So you sort of think, okay, well, gee, there is a whole nother world out there.
Oh,
And, but that's okay. It's not necessarily your role to know how it all works. You just need to be able to get that support. And in my case, I've been really super fortunate that the industry and the innovation and the business development, part of the university, absolutely awesome people with whom I work with. In fact, this year alone, we've been to India a couple of times, and they've accompanied me, and we've talked about how this work is going to be deployed, like green steel, and what is it that we need to do. So I think, to me, just like I'm passionate about my science and engineering, they're passionate about, how this, can actually be deployed. So I think part of that, learning and that experience that you have, you don't have to, again, feel like I'm a born entrepreneur. No, that's not necessarily the case. Doesn't have to be the case. You can be somebody who can kind of really ask for a bit of help and advice, from people, as happened in my case here at UNSW. And it was great to have incredible people at the uni who will kind of literally give all kinds of fabulous advice. And, so I think, to me, that's important, that in your journey of, I guess, being the entrepreneur, even if you kind of didn't realize that it was sort of a hidden talent that you had, but to the nuts and bolts of what you have to do is something that, you don't have to be afraid to ask questions and find out. You don't have to have all the answers, but, get some good advice from people. And I remember, before doing the very first presentation, flying off to the States all those years ago, the people at the uni were like, oh, wait, no, we need to launch the patent application, whatever. And you're going to go out there and you're going to speak on your work on green steel. Quick, we better do all that. So I think, to me, and again, that's something that, I'm so glad that they did it. So I think if everything in time, when it does happen, stop and take advice and listen.
yeah.
And don't feel like you need to have all the answers. And there's no such thing as a silly question. You can sort of go, the usual question comes up, patenting versus publishing and all of that sort of stuff. I mean, there are lots of different ways in which you can kind of tackle the ecosystem. All these things don't have to be as if it's one or the other. You can talk about how science can be published, and you can do that. And you can also talk about, protecting your IP and so on. So I think, to me, there are lots of different ways in which you can approach that. And we've really been fortunate at UNSW that there's an incredible, bunch of people. The director of the BD and commercialization, Jamie, was literally in India with me, in September, wanting to go, well, let's kind of, talk about how we get this, structure this deal. I'm like, great, I love to. So it's quite exciting to hear someone with his experience talk about that. And then we've got our BDM, Mark, who then sort of will try and, really talk about all the different ways in which you can kind of approach, different pathways towards solutions. And I think to me, it's really wonderful when, again, you find your local champions. Yes,
Yeah.
they might be, in the same institution, but they're so passionate about the work that you're doing. So I think to me, that's really how it happens. And learn, learn, learn. You learn all through your life.
Yeah. Oh, look, I don't think learning ever stops. As an engineer, I think you're always going to be doing continuing professional development and learning more.
Yes.
Most definitely. And I think too, some of those things that are non-engineering, like you mentioned, like patents and commercialization tools or whatnot, how do you strike a balance between the idea and we can sell it
Mm-hmm.
to idea and what impact is it going to make? Because I can see there just from how you're talking that there is definitely some different pathways and sometimes they might be the same one. But if you had some revolutionary idea that could change the world, if you went to the selling path, it might not have as much impact as it would if you went to the other way. So how do you, what's your thoughts on, that sort of different pathway approach? And I guess, how have you framed up your mindset to either way, or how have they helped you in either way?
Mm. Yeah, I think you have to go back, and again, we've talked about partnerships and we've talked about collaboration and values. If you and the values of your potential collaborators are well aligned, and you want to see the impact of your work happen, you do want the ability to think about more than just the economic bottom line. And I think to me, in all of those cases, to be able to think about what it means to be able to create, products. In our case, we're talking about from recycled content. You do want to be able to bring that so that it has benefits for, local communities. How do you actually structure that? You can think about having it so that you're not always sort of just saying, right, okay, I'll give away all my kind of know-how and IP and whatever, but rather build it in collaboration.
Mm.
Of course, who you partner with and who you work with, support them to succeed. Because if you're supporting your collaborator or your industry partner or whoever you're, working with, if you help them succeed, then together the outcomes are so much more powerful. So I usually feel that, look, it's not about, kind of going, here's something I've invented. Okay, I'm just going to hand it over to you and I'm going to just walk away. But rather to be able to continue to see how new science could be injected into the work, so that you're keeping always an eye on what some of the challenges are, but also tailoring the solution, so you get the best possible outcome for your industry partners. So I think it will never be, in my case, about, well, here it is, I'm just going to give it away and then walk away, but rather to be able to build that in collaboration. And I think a lot of people really appreciate that because, the science part of it and any new developments that occur can be quite exhilarating and fun to watch it unfold. And I think to me, that's really why collaborations work, because if there is new work that you're doing, people don't just want to be part of the initial piece that you collaborated on, but they want to grow in putting more and more on the collaborative journey. So I think to me, that's important, that if that's what you want, in my case, that's an important point, that I'd rather have, those kinds of collaborations with those people who and industries who want to see this as a journey of continuum, so that together we can make a difference, and that impact is created together. So I think to me, yeah, it's gonna be super, super exciting. I'm already seeing that with some of our new bits of work at the moment. People asking about what we're doing. So
Yeah.
just tomorrow we've got an opportunity. I'm speaking somewhere, and my industry partners excited and going to come along as my guest. And I think to me, all of this is part and parcel of the fact that, again, we're all passionate about it. If that bit is there, then everything else just follows on from there. Mm-hmm.
Well, I was actually going to ask you what a typical day in the life looks like, and then, what are the current, projects that you might have that you're really excited about right now? Really love to hear more about that.
Yeah, look, I mean, certainly, the kinds of things that I've mentioned around broadly plastics and metals. We've got industry partners who are working with us on that. So to be able to then look at some of the more complex products like e-waste.
Yeah.
I mean, e-waste is certainly not something you're going to solve overnight. The planet clearly has got a lot of products which will become obsolete with time, and electronics will contribute. It is one of the fastest growing waste, so how are you going to address that? And you're not going to address that by saying, I need one solution that solves everything. That's not going to happen. And so our ability to think in a way that allows us to have that modularity in going, okay, well, what's in there? Okay, there's some plastic there, but okay, there's also some amount of copper. Oh, wait, but actually in that particular other product, there might be some nickel, so you can start to see that there are a whole range of different elements. And if you actually drill right down at that elemental level, yes, it could be present as a metal or a metal oxide, for instance. I mean, all of these cases, I think to be able to, ask yourself that if we are going to address this complex challenge, we've got to have a completely new way of doing things. You can't just expect the same pathways and the same solutions now to solve problems that might have been okay. Even in Europe, people might say, well, Europe's doing that. Why aren't we doing that? I mean, different set of circumstances, as in, in Australia, we've got a bigger landmass. We've got a lot of questions around cost of logistics and how we're going to address that. So, whereas obviously concentration of population is what Europe has. You can bring together, economies of scale to work well. In Australia, maybe what we need to think about, which is what I'm developing, is economies of purpose. And, we really have to think in addressing these challenges from a whole different lens. So that's exciting. That's what we're doing. Our industry partners and us at Smart. That's what we're doing.
So what's the current biggest challenge in front of you at the moment with the mission that you're on?
I think, look, I mean, certainly if you think about the broader sort of journey on things like e-waste and, batteries and all of these kind of things that are there in the normal realm of what is as a result of the planet moving towards electrification. I think to me, those are the kinds of things that are exciting, because it's also an opportunity to create not only some of the new scientific solutions, so looking to do that, but also equally importantly, thinking the long-term strategy of what that solution might look like. So if it is going to be another microfactory, how are we going to design that? To me, I love the concept of how we can do the experiments in the lab and all of that, which is great. Now, once we've proven that successfully, what is it that makes that work? How do you translate that into actual application? Is what I'm excited about that, and I know our team members are also quite excited. We've got a few new things in the pipeline that.
Definitely. I mean, I'm obviously going there. We're going through the story in the chapters. So tell us more, like what's up next for you? What's the next sort of challenge for you? I mean, you've won awards. You've got these grants. You said you're flying around the world presenting these things. You're collaborating, on things like green steel. what's next for Veena? What's the next the mountain in front of you, and what does it look like?
Oh gosh, I mean, I think, it's easy to imagine and dream of our micro factories, kind of being deployed in a few places. It's a lot harder to implement. So I think to me the next kind of vision really of where we take that work into fulfilling the overall vision, and the next chapter on that is going to be around how some of these micro factories are going to be deployed, how they're going to be actually set up. What is that way in which that science can actually be translated? So I think all I can say is watch this space. There are a few confidential things in the pipeline that
Yeah.
I'm not going to talk about now. But I think that to me is exciting because it just means that it gives all of us, you know, I guess you could probably say many of those goosebumps moment when you kind of think about it and go, oh, that could be a possibility.
Is
uh,
that a micro factory in every suburb or LGA? Is that a vision?
I wouldn't probably go as far as every suburb, but I'd probably say, if you were looking at various regions,
Yeah.
I think to first get it to that point where it's seen as a regional, exercise. So yep, if we're doing, New South Wales versus, some of the other states, I think to me, the initial part of it would be, of course, want to make it happen. Of course, many of our industry partners who are here in New South Wales, working and collaborating with them would be a great outcome to demonstrate this. And that's really that ecosystem that we're building. And yeah, absolutely. We'd love to, as I said, there are a few other things in the pipeline that I'm excited about.
Love
So,
it.
hmm.
So like the industry in general, and I really, probably want to focus on that remanufacturing, recycling, you're really the area that you're playing in, and you're obviously at the forefront of the future, right? You're obviously pushing those boundaries and trying to invent and entrepreneur that future. What are some of the more global things that you think are at the next step of those sectors in the market? What are some of those future trends that you can sort of see that are on the horizon that might be a bit lofty at this time, but can you give us a bit more insight into what your take on some of those things might look like?
Yeah, look, I mean, it's interesting that we often, when we look at some of the challenging kind of areas where it's almost people might have put it in the too hard basket. I think to me, that's where we need to really go back and look at it. And yes, because I've spent a bit of time working on some of the steel solutions that we talked about before, but there is a lot of connected areas into that I think one needs to go back and address it, because you need to be able to go, okay, well, to make a particular metal, in this case, if we're talking about steel as an alloy, if it's got some of the inputs that requires to make that iron, should we not be then making that iron through green mechanisms? So if that means that we can produce green iron, does that mean that some of our, thinking around that could then be applicable to other scenarios as well? Because it's not just saying I've learned something, okay, that's great, we've applied that into green steel, but to fast track, I think, time is of the essence, and the planet needs these solutions to be implemented quickly. And I think to me, we've got to do the best we can in terms of learning from that experience and going, okay, well, so what does it take in terms of deploying into related sectors, but still those sectors that are, of course, as the planet knows, big emitting sectors, so we've got projects that we're doing in that space. And I think to me, that's really how I see that, as now it's very much about taking, a lot of those ideas and things that have been implemented and commercialized in one space, but to broadly talk about what it means for the planet if we really were to pick up on some of the other spaces where people need the metals or ceramics that, we need for our planet in terms of materials.
Yeah.
We need to think about materials as effectively as places where energy can be embedded. So the new way of thinking that, what if we could imagine that our production of all kinds of materials, whether it's, iron, steel, aluminum, copper, nickel, and so on,
Yeah.
could be produced in a way that we could effectively bring those, elements back to life over and over again. And to produce those in a way that is, sustainable requires us to also see our materials as effectively, a product that can store energy. So, we store energy by making that iron from iron oxide, because energy went into converting iron oxide into iron, and that iron is then used into making of steel. So really the next frontier has to be around what's coming into the supply chain, and to be able to really address some of those issues on how those supply chains could well become part of the solution, and not a problem, and just go, well, I have to eliminate that. Well, if you have to make steel, you need iron. So, we're talking about, iron as one of the, elements that goes into the making of steel. Yes, the dominant element, but how do you make that as green iron? And so part of our concepts that we've been developing in the making of green steel, now it's exciting new frontier to be able to deploy that, potentially into other avenues, so we can really fast track and accelerate in many instances implementation, which I think to me is going to be super exciting. And hopefully as the world starts to think about what it means to be achieving that net zero, which is what we're talking about, we all want to get there.
Yeah.
We've got to think about lateral integration, how laterally we can integrate thoughts and ideas and learn across the traditional sector boundaries. It's going to be exciting.
I mean, you touched on a few points there, but particularly speed. So I feel like the big drive for what you're pushing, and obviously your mission, is speed of execution, getting those people on board, and getting something done so that impact actually will have an impact overall. How are you actually facing that challenge at the moment? Because obviously, this is something that we need to have a real energy on right now to focus on. How are you doing that? And how do you see, I guess, just at a global stage, because there's a lot of talk, and you use the words net zero, and I just keep seeing years just keep pushing out and no one making commitments. How are you getting through that right now, and still, waving the baton to really push what you're out there trying to do?
Yeah, look, I mean, good question, because I think to me, you've got to have multiple pathways. There's no such thing as one single answer. And I think the more we're all working and pushing hard towards that overall goal, the better it's going to be for the planet. So it's not about saying here's a right solution and here's a wrong solution, but rather to have those sophisticated and mature conversations where we can say, look, okay, in our part of the world, in Australia, can we do this? Yes, can we help other countries achieve similar sort of outcomes as, we're showing success with, the example of using waste resources like tires. And, I talked about waste coffee and using that and making of these kinds of metals like iron and steel. I think to me is going to be, an example of how you kind of practically demonstrate that what you've achieved in the lab and what you've shown can be done, can actually be deployed. The technology can always be perfected down the road, but that first step is to be able to go, this is why it matters, that this is why we're going to do it. And to be able to show some runs on the board, even if it is, partial success, is going to be important, because as we said, together we can learn and support each other. So
Yeah.
I think you don't have to sort of go, well, only when I'm going to have something perfectly developed. If the initial concepts have been proven and the proof of concept is there and we've kind of done that, then I think, to me, that's the time to start to engage your collaborators and to start to think about how that could be done in practice. So I think, to me, our journey of remanufacturing, where we're taking different kinds of waste resources and creating value from waste, has to also bring together all these other concepts, which is, what is it going to mean? Are we going to really lower our greenhouse gas emissions by doing it in a certain way? If we're going to use more recycled content, of course we will.
Yeah.
It's, again, how do we get there? How do we get there in a way that makes sense at an industrial scale, at a commercially relevant outcomes, so that, different countries can adopt those types of solutions. And again, it doesn't have to be one size fits all. It doesn't have to be, here's one scale and this is the only way you can do it. So I think part of what we want to do is also try and have those concepts and ideas so that we can demonstrate that it's going beyond recycling. And if remanufacturing is allowing us to, lower our greenhouse gas emissions, then that's absolutely fantastic. And what are the different mechanisms by which you can do it will come down to how well the fundamentals work. And that's why, back to that point, that the fundamental science that, we're pioneering in how the transformation occurs of all of our waste resources is something that you can never stop doing.
And you use the word a few times, and I don't hear it a lot, pioneering. And I really, that word needs to be used more. I think engineers and scientists and inventors, obviously pioneering, but that is really what you're doing. And I could see that it is at the forefront. You are challenging the status quo. I think that's what, entrepreneurs, really pushing to do, inventors pushing to do. With, I see you, and this is very, very outsider, right? But you're an engineer, you're on TV, you're on shows, you're on TED Talks. And I hope that there's a lot of young engineers out there who are listening, who can think, okay, here's an engineer, you're female, you're Indian background, you've got, you're on TV. How do you sum up what you've done, or at least what you're trying to do, and give some of the young engineers just some advice at a very high level to go, this isn't rocket science. I've just done these things, being honest to myself, whatever. How do you break that down for hopefully some listeners that might just take some inspiration, not just from how far you've come, but to what you stand for?
Yeah, look, I mean, you have to be, I guess, true to your own values. That's first and foremost. You've got to be, authentic in what it is that you believe in your heart is possible, is doable, but also not hide away from the fact that if it is hard work, then talk about it. If it's not easy, talk about it. It's not meant to be easy. So I think, to me, that is about the human spirit that can thrive on challenges, but then also have, as we were talking about, find your champions, those who will be on the journey with you. So important. Challenges are always going to be there in any job, and anything you take on. And if what you do is something you do because, first and foremost, it comes from your heart and you're passionate about something, it's always going to be something that stays with you forever. Because most importantly, you know what you're going to do? You're going to have loads of fun.
Yeah. So go for the challenges.
Yeah.
You know, be honest with yourself. Find your champions, and really push hard at it. You know, I love that. That's really solid advice for anyone. And you know, it is funny because I did think about an introduction for this, saying, "Oh, it's the engineer who's on TV," because you don't actually see a lot of them. Let's be honest. You know, there's not a lot of engineers out there who are, you know, out there on TV and on docos and whatnot. So yeah, I mean, you know, power to you for being almost a voice in a way, because I'm sure that, you know, the platform that you have, I'm sure it's, you know, you need to be very wary and position what you're saying very carefully. But, you know, I think you've done it very well. So congratulations on that.
Thank you. Thanks, Darren. Really appreciate your kind words and appreciate the opportunity to have this chat with you and share a little bit of you know what I'm passionate about. And I really hope that this has been interesting and fun
Yeah.
from a conversational perspective. You feel that this is going to be of you know, some value to your listeners.
Oh, of course. So just on that, is there anywhere where the listeners can go? I mean, I can, you know, use your LinkedIn or otherwise. Is there something that you want to point the listeners to that might get them more involved with your journey or what you're setting out to do?
Yeah, look, certainly Smart Center at UNSW. So just smart.unsw.edu.au. I think if people want to read more about, you know, the work that Smart Center does at UNSW, there's always cool bits of information. But yeah, absolutely, LinkedIn is another place where if people are kind of just seeing what is happening in the broader world, where I'm probably giving talks or collaborating. Yeah, we happy to also share that type of information. But happy to engage if there's anything of interest that people have in the work we do.
Yeah, that's amazing. So yeah, I mean, openly, thank you so much. It's been amazing talking to you and hearing about everything that you're doing. And yeah, it's really inspirational. You know, I think there's a lot of young engineers that would only ever imagine earlier in their careers or even as kids to think that they could be an inventor.
Yeah.
To be able to talk to one in the flesh who is out there pioneering. I'm going to start using that word more. So I'm going to add that to the vocab. So thank you for that. And yeah, it's been an honor, a privilege. So thanks so much for coming on.
Thank you. Thanks for having me, Darren.
Thanks so much for listening. I really hope you enjoyed that podcast. Please like and subscribe. It helps us reach so many more aspiring engineering professionals and entrepreneurs. You can find us on LinkedIn, Spotify, and YouTube.